Hello, children. It's Mr. Rob, and it's time for another story. I'm really excited about this story. This comes from Kingdom Parables, and it's the story of Cornelius T. Mouse and Sons. And you can find this story in the Bible, found in Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. It's the story of the prodigal son. And as we are in Holy Week, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you find Jesus in this story? Cornelius T. Mouse and Sons. There was once a mouse named Cornelius who lived with his two sons, Samuel and Timothy, on an estate in the countryside. Cornelius was a very prosperous mouse who owned a thriving apple orchard and operated a cheeseworks where cheese was made. He and his sons lived in a large home atop a grass-covered hill overlooking the estate. Their house had many rooms, but Cornelius's favorite was the library. Many an evening would find Cornelius seated in the library, reading away for hours. While Cornelius was quite proud of his estate, his orchard, and his cheeseworks, he was most proud of his sons, Samuel and Timothy. Cornelius loved and prized them above all else. Samuel, his oldest son, was a serious sort who had taken a keen interest in cheese making. His younger brother, Timothy, on the other hand, had absolutely no interest in work of any kind. Yet, despite this lack of interest, Timothy had an eye for apples and worked in the orchard. One fall afternoon, Cornelius finished his work early and set off for the library. With a mug of cider by his side, he browsed the shelves for something to read. He finally selected a fine little book and had just settled into his chair when there came a tap at the door. "Come in," he said. "Sir," his housekeeper, Mrs. Wiggins, said as she opened the door, "the Beaver brothers are here with your sign." "Oh, very good," Cornelius said excitedly. "Let's have a look." The Beavers carried in an oak sign which had been skillfully engraved with tall, stylish letters. It read, "Cornelius T. Mouse and Sons. Apples by the bushel and cheese by the wheel." "My, but it's handsome," Cornelius said. "Won't the boys be surprised?" That evening, after supper, Cornelius brought a cloth-covered stand into the dining room. "Sons, I am pleased to announce the formation of a new company," he said, pulling the cloth from the sign. "Cornelius T. Mouse and Sons." The two young mice read in unison, "Apples by the bushel and cheese by the wheel." "Samuel, henceforth you shall be my head cheesemaker," he stated proudly. "And Timothy, you shall be my chief appler." Then he pulled 2 gold rings from his pocket and placed them on his son's fingers. "To signify our new partnership," he explained. "Thank you, Father," Samuel said with wide eyes. But Timothy didn't say anything. He just stared out of the window. "Is something bothering you, Timothy?" Cornelius asked. "I don't want to be your partner," Timothy said. "Now that I'm grown, I want to move to the city." Cornelius blinked several times, and his legs began to wobble. "Perhaps you could give me my share of the business in coins, Father." That would put me well on my way." Cornelius silently led Timothy upstairs to his study. Opening his money box, he counted out a tall stack of gold coins. "Be careful with these," he warned. "They are your inheritance, not something to be spent foolishly." The young mouse nodded and accepted the money. Early the next morning, Timothy left for the city of Varmintsville. It was a long trip, but when the stagecoach finally rolled into town, he took one look around and decided that it would be a wonderful place to live. Timothy wasted no time establishing himself in his new home. He took a room in the best hotel in town and immediately went on a shopping expedition. He bought all sorts of fine clothes, jewelry, and nifty gadgets. Everywhere he went, he bought whatever pleased his eye. And that evening, Timothy threw a wonderful party, ordering cartloads of snacks, exotic fruits and drinks, cakes and pastries. He even hired a band of rats to provide music. Back at the estate, Cornelius was very worried about Timothy, and as the days passed, he found it difficult to keep his mind on his work. During the daylight hours, he would often walk to the main road and look to see if his son was returning. Many an evening, he would skip his supper and head straight to bed, but try as he might, he could not go to sleep. Meanwhile, Timothy continued shopping and throwing wild parties until one morning he found that he had spent his entire fortune in a few short weeks. In order to pay his bills, he had to return the things he had bought and was even forced to give up his gold ring, the one his father had given him. He was tossed out of his hotel and wandered aimlessly from street to street until he happened upon one of his city friends. "Timothy," his friend said, "boy, am I ever glad to see you. I've really been down on my luck. Could you spare some change?" Of course, Timothy couldn't help him, and when his other friends heard that he would no longer be throwing nightly parties, they deserted him. He was left poor and all alone in the streets of Varmintsville. That very day, Cornelius had been sitting at his desk, trying to do his work, yet he could not keep his mind on business. "You're worried about that young mouse of yours, aren't you?" Mrs. Wiggins asked as she brought him a tray of snacks. Cornelius nodded. "If I might offer a suggestion, sir," she said, "perhaps you could take your carriage out for a ride." "I have work to do," Cornelius said flatly, "and I am in no mood for a ride. Even if the drive were in the direction of, say, Varmintsville." "A sterling idea, Mrs. Wiggins," Cornelius cried. Minutes later, Cornelius had hooked up his horse and was flying down the road. Back in Varmintsville, Timothy was getting hungrier and hungrier. Just when he was about to give up hope, he noticed a sign which read, "Help Wanted." He asked about it and was given a job serving tables in an eatery. The restaurant was called the Slop Shop, and Timothy soon discovered why. The customers were pigs. His job was to carry large platters piled high with slop out to the porky patrons. As Timothy served the hungry hogs day after day, he came to a decision. "I would quite prefer my old life in the country to this," he said. "I wonder if my father would take me back as an apprentice apple tender. I do believe it's worth finding out." So when the pigs were busy gulping down slop, Timothy made his apologies to the owners and left. Cornelius was nearing Varmitsville when he decided to stop for lunch. Spreading out a blanket, he sat down on the crest of a hill to nibble on some cheese. While he was munching, he spotted something down the road. He soon realized that the something was a someone, a small animal walking towards him. Could it be? Cornelius wondered. "It is," he shouted, running down the hill. "Timothy, my son." Timothy's stomach was growling, and his feet were weary from walking. But as he looked up and saw an animal running toward him, flailing its arms, he forgot about how tired and hungry he was. Could it be, he wondered. "It is," he shouted, "Father!" And he scurried up the hill to meet him. Moments later, the two mice were hugging and exchanging kisses. "Father, I'm so sorry," Timothy blubbered. "I lost my inheritance. I even lost your ring." He hung his head. "I'm not worthy to be your son, but I might return as an apprentice apple tender." Cornelius lifted Timothy's head with his paw. "You will always be my son, and any son of mine deserves nothing less than a full partnership." Timothy's eyes widened in amazement. "About that ring," Cornelius said, pulling the gold band from his own finger. "Here, take mine." Cornelius and Timothy raced home in the carriage. When they arrived at the estate, Cornelius ordered Mrs. Wiggins to prepare an extra special occasion supper and invite all of the neighbors to celebrate Timothy's homecoming. Samuel, who had been hard at work in the cheeseworks, returned just as the party began. Hearing music, he looked in through the window and saw a crowd of animals laughing and eating. "What's all the fuss?" he asked. "Oh, Samuel, it's so exciting," the kindly kangaroo rat said. "Your brother, Timothy, has come home." "Is that all?" he grumbled. "A fool's return is no reason to celebrate." "But won't you come in to the party?" Mrs. Wiggins asked. "I believe I'll stay out here, thank you," Samuel answered snootily. Cornelius came out to talk with Samuel. "Why won't you rejoice with us?" Cornelius asked. "All these years I've worked for you, Father," Samuel complained, "and you've never thrown me a party. Yet Timothy leaves and wastes his inheritance and—" "Samuel, my dear son," Cornelius said with a smile, "all that I have is yours. But your brother was as good as gone, and now he has come back to us. We must celebrate." Samuel frowned. He understood, but he didn't think it was fair. Though he wasn't happy about it, he followed his father inside and shook hands with Timothy. The next day, after the party was over, Cornelius called Samuel and Timothy into his study. "Now," he said with a smile, "let the three of us work together and make Cornelius T. Mouse and Sons a success." And in the following days, they did just that. You can read a story like this in your own Bible at home. Jesus tells this story in Luke 15, 11 through 32. It goes like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Hello, children. It's Mr. Rob. I'm in the old church getting ready for the Palm Sunday service. Thank you for reading that book with me. Before we started the book, I put the challenge in front of you. Can you find Jesus in the story? Well, did you? Jesus can be seen in the older brother. Now, he doesn't act like the older brother. He does it the way the older brother should have done it. You see, Jesus is the real older brother. And he went after the younger brother and gathered us to himself, picked us up out of our brokenness, and he takes us back to the Father. Jesus does what the older brother should have done in our story, and he does it on the cross. On the cross, Jesus gathers us up to himself, cleans us up, and takes us to the Father. That's what we're talking about in Holy Week, the cross of Jesus. So I pray that you have a wonderful Holy Week, and I look forward to seeing you on Easter.